for the Geary 19th Avenue Subway and Regional Connections Study. We're thrilled that such a large group is with us this evening. My name is Jesse Kaler. I serve as the Rail Program Manager at the San Francisco County Transportation Authority. The Transportation Authority is leading this study in partnership with the SFMTA and the San Francisco Planning Department. I want to welcome everyone to this event. I will be facilitating this evening's discussion about this planning study. A few housekeeping items as we get underway. Please note that we will be recording this evening's meeting for those who are not able to attend and who may wish to view it later. We will post a link to the recording on our study webpage at sfcta.org/Geary19th. Secondly, if you have questions during the presentation, please submit them via the Q&A function in Zoom. Finally, for those who would like Spanish or Cantonese language support, we have translated materials on the website, and we have interpreters on hand with us this evening. Should you wish to have translation in either of these languages, please click the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen to join the in-language breakout room, or in-language interpretation channel, I should say, via the Zoom interpretation function. I'll introduce our two interpreters. First, Marcy, who will be doing Spanish interpretation.
Buenas tardes, hoy tenemos servicios de interpretación simultánea en español y en cantonés. Si los necesita y está usando una computadora, use el botón en la barra de herramientas en la parte inferior de la pantalla donde está ubicado el mapa mundo. Seleccione el idioma español para escuchar la interpretación simultánea durante esta presentación que se encenderá. El servicio se encenderá posterior a estos anuncios. Si está usando Zoom en una tableta o teléfono inteligente, puede acceder al canal de interpretación seleccionando la elipsis o los 3 puntos para ver el icono de mapa mundo donde puede elegir la interpretación. Nótese que puede escuchar el sonido de la sala principal a un volumen más bajo con la interpretación o puede silenciar el sonido de la sala principal para escuchar solo el canal de interpretación usando el botón Mute Original Audio en la sección para seleccionar servicios de interpretación. Gracias.
We're also joined by Mandy for Cantonese interpretation. Mandy?
Hello， 大家好，歡迎你參加呢個會議。咁喺呢個會議期間，如果你有任何問題，你可以使用你嘅 Zoom 下邊嘅 Q&A， 即係問問題個點嚟分享你嘅問題。另外咧，如果你需要中文翻譯嘅話咧，喺你個Zoom 下邊咧都有一個係關於 interpretation， 即係話翻譯個點嘅，咁可以選擇你要翻譯嘅語言。
Wonderful. I'd like to briefly start by providing a bit of background on the purpose of this work and what has led up to this first public outreach meeting with this evening's town hall. The concept of a Geary and 19th Avenue corridor subway was identified through the Connect SF program, which is San Francisco's long-range planning program for the development of our transportation system. In 2021, the SFMTA's Connect SF transit strategy put the project forward as a priority for rail expansion, and the project was subsequently included in the Transportation Authority's long-range investment blueprint known as the San Francisco Transportation Plan in 2022. Our current study phase aims to lay out the strategic framework for the project in terms of broad benefits, costs, and planning issues, and to identify the roadmap for advancing the project over time. This evening, we are seeking your input and perspective on the project and on the study's approach. We are in the very early stages of discussion and analysis for this project, and the community's input and engagement is critical to shape this work. It's now my sincere pleasure to introduce our Vice Chair and District 7 Supervisor, Myrna Melgar, who first requested this study. In addition to being Vice Chair of the Transportation Authority Board, Supervisor Melgar serves as the Chair of the Land Use and Transportation Committee at the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. Supervisor Melgar also serves the city and the region as a member of the Board of Directors of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District representing San Francisco. In these and many other roles, past and present, Supervisor Melgar has prioritized investments in housing, transit, and climate equity on the West Side and throughout San Francisco and the Bay Area as a whole. Vice Chair Melgar, welcome.
Thank you, Jesse, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for spending time today, this evening with us for this important conversation, which ties together so many of the salient land use and transportation issues facing San Francisco today and also into the future. So as Vice Chair of the Transportation Authority and as a supervisor for San Francisco's West Side, I'm really proud to sponsor this planning work. It represents a major opportunity to shape San Francisco into the future. The West Side still has a long way to go in terms of developing our infrastructure for so many things, including housing and transit, to serve future generations and to help take us along on this climate crisis. But we're doing our part. I'm happy to report that yesterday the board gave its final approval for the Stonestown project, which will add 3,500 units of housing on the west side at Stonestown next to San Francisco State. And the Balboa Reservoir is going to break ground later on this year. A regionally connected rail subway under Geary Boulevard, 19th Avenue, has the promise and the potential to transform how this future development all over the West Side will shape our area. It will connect our city and the West Side to the rest of the Bay Area and beyond. And we know there are pressing financial and operational needs in our transit operations now. That needs to remain our collective focus while the city is recovering. But this project is a strong performer in terms of the regional and local connectivity that we need. It will attract new riders, it will connect new residents to the rest of the world, and it will provide us an opportunity to design this into the future, to fund it, to think and dream of the future for our community, to engage the community and to make sure that it reflects our needs and our priorities, and that it will connect us to the rest of the area, San Francisco, the Peninsula, San Mateo County, the East Bay. So what you will hear this evening is a discussion of the planning process, and I really look forward to hearing your ideas and to welcome you into this dialogue. And thank you, Jesse, for giving me the opportunity to welcome everyone, and I'm looking forward to the work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Melgar. I will now introduce the other agency staff who join us this evening, who will be here to facilitate this conversation and to answer your questions and gather input. I'm joined this evening by Stephen Chen, Director of Communications at the Transportation Authority, Brittany Chan, Communications Manager at the Transportation Authority, and Andrew Heidel, Principal Transportation Planner and our Project Manager. I will now turn the presentation over to Project Manager Andrew Heidel to facilitate the presentation and bring forward a number of real-time questions for all of you.
Thanks, Jesse, and thanks again to everyone for spending time with us this evening to learn more and share your thoughts with us as we begin our planning for the Geary 19th Avenue subway. As Jesse mentioned, I'm Andrew Heidel, Principal Planner at the San Francisco County Transportation Authority and Project Manager for this study. Tonight, I'll walk us through some material about what we're looking to accomplish in this phase, how that will help us tee up a clear planning process for the future, some of the things we think will be important to consider as we weigh options and trade-offs, and get your feedback on those as well as your additional perspectives. As Jesse mentioned, we'll also have a number of interactive questions that will pop up throughout the evening, with time for question and answer at the end. So as Jesse mentioned in his notes, please do feel free to drop questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer, or at the top of your screen if you're joining on a phone or a tablet, which might look a little different as I go through the presentation, and Jesse will help us facilitate and answer those at the end. Just to note that if you don't see the Q&A button, or if you don't see the interpretation button, you may have to click the more with 3 dots to access both of those features. So off the top, let's quickly jump into that first interactive question. Where are you joining from today? I should have a poll pop up here soon. We've listed a few neighborhoods by supervisor district in the question. We're curious, do you live near Geary Boulevard, 19th Avenue, elsewhere in San Francisco, or beyond? Give folks a few seconds to answer there. Okay, Brittany, should we share results? Now, so it's great to see a wide variety of interest. It looks like we have people from all but 3 of our supervisorial districts, and also the East Bay, Daly City, the Peninsula, and some folks have entered some additional options as well. So it's great to see that wide variety of interest, which really does speak to the potential transformative impact, as Supervisor Melgar spoke to, and the deep interest in the subway, which I'll come back to in just a bit. So off the top, well, it looks like many of you are already quite familiar with the corridor based on where you're joining from that we're talking about today. I thought it would be worth taking a moment to just appreciate the diversity, vibrancy, attractiveness of all the different types of neighborhoods and attractions along Geary Boulevard and 19th Avenue. So as shown in some of these photos, the Geary 19th corridor is home to many major destinations, including shopping like Stonestown, recreation like Golden Gate Park, different types of neighborhoods like the Tenderloin, Japantown, and the Fillmore, the Richmond, and the Sunset. Some of whom are home to educational institutions like SF State, University of San Francisco, and hospitals like Kaiser and Cal Pacific at Mount Zion, UCSF Parnassus in the Inner Sunset. A future Geary 19th Avenue subway has the potential to transform how many of these important destinations and communities are connected to one another and to the region, while we advance our city's goals of improving transit, supporting equity, affordability, economic vitality, and environmental stewardship. Let's go to poll number 2. We're interested to hear from you. How do you travel in the corridor today? Do you take transit, walk, bike, drive, something else? And if you live, work, study, or visit the corridor, where do you travel to most frequently? Got lots of good results coming in. Give it a few more seconds. All right, let's go ahead and share results. Take a look at those. So it looks like number 1 way people get around is by transit, followed by walking and driving. Lots of respondents for bike or making combination trips as well. People like to go to and from downtown San Francisco, Golden Gate Park, Richmond, Japantown, but also a few of you mentioned, regional destinations in the East Bay, San Mateo Peninsula. A few go to all of these places. So again, great to see such a wide variety of ways that people get around and where they go in the corridor. It helps reinforce that there's just so many different types of trips and connections that a subway might serve, and not just morning and evening commutes, which is something we'll want to touch on as well. So I do want to recognize that, of course, the work we're doing today is the latest in a long history of advocacy and interest in bringing rail or a subway to the Geary corridor. The concept of a subway under Geary Boulevard has been discussed for over 70 years, dating back to the original planning studies for the BART system in the 1950s. And since then, a number of studies and plans have consistently identified the need for a better connection between the West Side and downtown San Francisco, including San Francisco's 4 corridor plans that shows up in the upper right of this slide, and the 2016 subway vision work prompted by then Supervisor and now Senator Scott Wiener, and most recently through the citywide Connect SF and San Francisco Transportation Plan process. Throughout these studies, the needs of riders have been consistent: faster trips, less crowding, better connections, as the supervisor mentioned, maintaining our state of good repair. But we've also learned things from that years of different work, and our understanding of the solutions has advanced. In this case, aligning a Geary subway with a new Transbay rail crossing in the east, as shown in the lower right, and connecting it with 19th Avenue connection to San Mateo County in the south, allows the project to act as a broader part of the regional East Bay to Peninsula connection, while also serving parts of San Francisco that today are not well connected to the regional transit network. So enter Connect SF, as some of you may be familiar with, which was a multi-agency citywide planning effort to create a long-range plan for San Francisco's transportation needs. Connect SF identified for the first time a Geary 19th Avenue subway combined as a high priority long-term project, combining the needs of both corridors together so that we could serve those travelers in San Francisco as well as places beyond. Our current phase of work that we're here to talk about today is to pick up where Connect SF left off and refine the case for moving the Geary 19th Avenue subway into planning and development, while also developing a roadmap for the next steps to move the project forward. Let's drill down a bit into the need for a subway. As we already pointed out, today, the Geary 19th Avenue corridor is one of the busiest in San Francisco, with a high concentration of jobs, population, major medical centers, education campuses, and other institutions. The 38R and 38 Express buses today serve about 40,000 people a day, second in San Francisco only to the 14th Mission routes, with an additional 12,000 people per day on the 28 and 28R on 19th Avenue. Looking past the year 2050 in this corridor that is already so supportive of transit, Connect SF found that a regionally connected subway would have ridership of about 300,000 passengers per day, with about a third of those riders traveling to or from places outside of San Francisco. So just as a benchmark for folks to conceptualize that, 300,000 riders is about the equivalent of BART's Transbay ridership on a weekday before the COVID-19 pandemic. That 300,000 number doesn't just happen in a vacuum, though. We do recognize that more housing is coming to Western San Francisco, and the recently adopted housing element called for nearly half of San Francisco's over 80,000 new housing units to be built in areas that could be served by a potential Geary 19th Avenue subway. This would make the area one of the fastest growing population centers in Northern California. So given this long-term growth and pandemic recovery, Connect SF's analysis showed that buses, even after the implementation of recently completed and in-progress projects like Geary Rapid and the Geary Improvement projects led by SFMTA, would simply not be enough to serve the demands of travel in the corridor in the long term, and that there needs to be a holistic solution both on the surface and underground. Finally, a Geary 19th Avenue subway would also bring those regional destinations we've been talking about, hospitals, shopping, education, directly in reach of the regional rail system when they aren't today. People could board a train along Geary or 19th Avenue and quickly reach destinations not only within San Francisco, but potentially also in the East Bay or San Mateo County. This would also help the region bridge the gap between San Francisco jobs and more affordable housing outside of the city. So if you can't already tell, we think there's tremendous opportunity for delivering real improvements in the corridor and helping San Francisco meet its goals of improving transit in one of the busiest corridors in San Francisco, while also supporting equity, affordability, economic vitality, and environmental stewardship. We're still in early days, but key anticipated benefits of the project include reduced crowding and faster trips for transit riders, improved travel time and reliability for all other types of trips, reduced vehicle miles traveled, and fewer greenhouse gas emissions. There's also an opportunity for the project to support other San Francisco plans and policies that help us play our part, as Supervisor Melgar mentioned, in addressing housing, climate, and affordability challenges that stretch beyond our own boundaries. So let's take a break for a final poll. Having heard that, how would a potential Geary 19th Avenue subway help improve your access to top destinations? And as we look ahead, what are some of the issues you're most interested in learning about as we work to plan the subway? So some of those things could be, as I mentioned, faster, more direct transit options, more reliability, less congestion, less transfers, all of the above. And in terms of the issues that you're interested in learning about, development along the corridor, station location or routing of the subway, starting to get specific about lines and dots on a map, impacts of construction, either on businesses, on traffic, or other options. Plenty of responses coming in. Thank you all. Give it a couple more seconds here. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap up. So taking a look through, People are definitely interested in faster, more direct transit options, along with more reliability and less transit transfers. And thank you for folks that said all of the above, of course, as well. And in terms of the issues that you're interested in learning more about, unsurprisingly, routing of the subway station locations, what this project will actually start to look like, are very important. And also high up there as well, transit-oriented development and housing plans in the corridor. So appreciate that as well. Oops. So I hate to be the one to bring our optimistic attitude about all this down to a little bit of reality, but as Jesse mentioned, we're very early days here, and I want to emphasize how planning for these kinds of generational investments is a multi-year and multi-step process. To identify a preferred alternative, so as you're also eager to see the actual routing of the subway, where the station locations might go, what kind of trains would actually run in the subway, how they might connect beyond San Francisco, we know that much more technical work and community conversations will need to happen. So that's why we're starting now with our current initial phase, where we'll reconfirm the case for the project, update some of the information I've been sharing with you today with expected ridership and costs, and lay out a roadmap through these future phases and steps, with a relatively modest investment of time and resources up front that will help us advise you, members of the public, and elected officials about how and when to proceed as we grow in size and cost, as shown on the illustration. Our big goal at the conclusion of each of these phases is to know enough that we feel comfortable committing the resources needed to advance to a subsequent phase. So to be clear, we're not looking to draw those lines on a map or make decisions about what those are in this phase. That will come in the following alternatives analysis phase. But we do want to recognize that it's important to start inventorying and having conversations about what those ingredients would be and what will lead us to a successful project that communities can support and benefit from. So, for example, by some of your responses interested in land use and transportation connection, we want to make sure that we're looking to frame this not just as a transportation project, but one with broader regional, economic, vitality, environmental factors as well. And so we also need to be able to capture input from our partner agencies. As we look to make sure that this project is a critical link in the region, San Francisco won't be able to do that alone. So we need to be able to provide input to larger regional statewide planning efforts, like the Link 21 New Transbay Crossing and the statewide rail plan as well. So as we take an early look at what some of those key considerations are, and thank you for your input on some of those, I wanted to share what some of our early thinking on the project team is by segment before we head to Q&A. So again, as a reminder, we're not trying to answer necessarily or solve any of these at this phase. We're trying to understand what's a priority for you and community members and what's relevant to help develop the framing for future decision-making, so we lay the right foundation and can move forward with confidence. So as we discussed earlier, our first segment here along Geary Boulevard itself is already one of the city's top transit corridors with good connections to downtown. However, it's harder to make trips north-south or to southwestern San Francisco or south of Golden Gate Park without multiple transfers. There's also a number of key cultural, community, and institutional destinations in this part of the city, as well as a number of equity priority communities, such as the Fillmore Western Addition and Japantown. Our second segment is tackling the question of how exactly the subway makes that transition between Geary Boulevard and 19th Avenue. Connect SF left this area as a large bubble with options covering most of the eastern half of Golden Gate Park. And as I noted, our current phase isn't looking to necessarily refine that further. Look for that in the next phase of work. But we will be exploring if any of the options are off the table, so to speak, either for technical reasons, such as curves or geologic limitations or other factors at a very high level. Looking ahead to the alternatives analysis phase, we'll also try to frame up the decisions and trade-offs to be made here. There's a lot of opportunities to serve a wide variety of trips in this segment that aren't easily made today, and to make a big impact to support both local and regional travel through the right connections to the surface network, like the 38 rapid buses and Judah and others. And last, but certainly not least, on 19th Avenue, there's an opportunity, as Supervisor Melgar mentioned at the top, to shape the growth in a generation of transportation and land use changes. Today, Southwest San Francisco has some of the highest rates of driving in the city, and 19th Avenue is one of the city's most perpetually congested corridors for cars and drivers. We know that that's often the result of the fact that so many trips are to and from northern San Mateo County, trips that aren't necessarily well served by transit today, so people choose to drive. Can we do something about that with this project? There's also an opportunity to provide a fast backup to Muni Metro to and from downtown San Francisco in case of incidents or planned work or construction that shuts down the existing Market Street Muni Metro subway. Zooming back out for a minute and thinking holistically about the project, we do know that we need to be thinking about the transit network integration and technology that we would recommend for the subway. So the figure here on the screen is from the Link 21 market analysis, which shows Western San Francisco as one of the highest potential growth areas for regional rail trips, if better connections like a Geary 19th Avenue subway and a new Transbay crossing are in place. So we want to ask, what benefits and trade-offs are there to creating a system that can through run trains to the East Bay, San Mateo County, or is it possible to do both? If the preferred technology choices are different between a Geary 19th Avenue subway and a Link 21 tunnel, is it possible to make transfers as seamless as possible, like at BART's MacArthur station, where trains arrive and passengers simply cross the platform? Finally, we also want to know what it would take to attract funding and what we might need to learn from other policies that this project alone can address, like land use, parking, regional and federal funding picture to support moving a Geary 19th Avenue subway forward. We'll look to explore these questions as we move this phase forward. So before I wrap up the presentation, one final note. We're doing this round of outreach this summer with this content, starting with this virtual town hall this evening, and as well as offering conversations with interested community groups. We have a second town hall at 10 a.m. on July 20th, this Saturday. We'll cover the exact same information there. You're welcome to join us, but you will hear me say the same stuff again. And recordings will be posted to our website shortly after, again at sfcta.org/Geary19th, one word. If you'd like us to come present to your group, please do contact us at Geary19th@sfcta.org. And if you have any other questions that we don't get to today or pop up into your mind as you think about this evening, do feel free to reach out by email as well. We're looking to be back out speaking with you towards the end of this year with those updated cases and deliverables, building on, refining, and updating the ConnectSF analysis, and with that proposed roadmap to move through the next steps. That will culminate in a conclusion and final report with recommendations this winter. I'd now like to turn things back over to Jesse, who will help facilitate our Q&A session for the remainder of our time. Again, if you have a question or comment that you haven't already asked or had answered, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to enter that question. As I mentioned, if you're not able to get to your question or you think of something later, please do feel free to send us an email. And I'll leave these 3 questions on the screen in case they plant seeds or as any prompts, but the floor is yours. Feel free to ask questions on your mind. Jesse.
Great, thanks, Andy, for that presentation, and thanks to all of you who have submitted questions. I'm going to, several of them touch on similar themes, so I'll do my best to restate them, and we should be able to get to them. Andy, there's a few questions that have to do with the project and potential phasing, so maybe I'll read a couple of these for you and you could take them together. One is, could this project be phased so that we at least would get a Geary downtown rail option first? And second question in a similar theme, why the choice to build a much longer subway across both the Geary and 19th Avenue corridors instead of just a Geary subway, in addition to the earlier considered M Ocean View? That one has about 3 threads to it, so I can help you get to all of them if you'd like.
Yeah, so I think I'll speak to the phasing question first. Yes, I think one of the things that we do want to explore in our current phase of work is what potential phasing options are on the table. I don't think we'll be able to make a recommendation about how to build the project in segments or break that up until we're sure what the project is, which won't come until the subsequent alternatives analysis phase. But we certainly do recognize that there's opportunities to break this into smaller pieces, and that it's likely that segments of it can get benefits earlier than the first. As to the choice to build a longer subway, including both Geary and 19th, a couple pieces of analysis came up in the ConnectSF work that led to the combination of Geary and 19th Avenue. I'll touch on them briefly and let me know if we should dive in a little bit more. The first is, as I mentioned in some of the presentation, the ability to make the subway part of the regional and statewide rail network as an option to get people from the East Bay to the peninsula while also delivering a lot of benefits to Western San Francisco and connections to downtown. I think we should recognize that this is going to be a very expensive project. Connectus have estimated between $15 billion and $25 billion. So it's going to be important for us to show the value of this project, not just to San Francisco, but to the region. And we think we have a really strong case for that to make. The other technical reason is that trains need a place to go. So previous Geary subway studies had proposals to build yards, storage, cleaning facilities out towards the end of Geary Boulevard. Those are really difficult to construct in San Francisco. I think one of the plans even had a potential underwater option of a yard, which is, we're talking about lots of high costs. That's an even higher cost, particularly in a seismically active area. So being able to take advantage of existing and potentially expanding maintenance storage facilities for the vehicles in the East Bay, at Colma, for example, is something that's really important to make sure that there's reliability and frequency that we want in the corridor.
Thanks, Sandy. We have several questions that relate to technology, and you touched on this briefly in your presentation. I wonder if you could do a few things, sort of talk about how and when we might make a decision on technology, and maybe before that, as this is part of some of the questions, what are the sort of distinguishing characteristics of the technologies that are under consideration?
Sure. Illustration, I went through this slide fairly quickly, but lower left here, we have 3 technologies under consideration right now. So that's 2 people are probably familiar with: BART technology, same BART trains that you see today, wide gauge, operate as rapid transit trains in San Francisco, and wider, faster stop spacing outside of San Francisco. We have Muni Metro, so that's our JKLM-N lines that we have today. They can run on the surface or the subway, but they're smaller size vehicles. They have a little bit lower capacity. For this study, the benefit would be that they'd be interoperable with the Muni system, but it would be difficult to through run trains outside of San Francisco. The one at the top, regional rail, is something that we are close to having, but don't quite have in the Bay Area today. So Caltrain will soon be an electrified railroad. And when we speak about regional rail, that's what we mean. So trains that can run on railroads like Caltrain, Capitol Corridor, not just the BART tracks, but on the larger Northern California and statewide and countrywide rail system. But electrified can provide the same sort of service frequency and speed that BART can, or not too far off. So the difference being its interoperability, its ability to go elsewhere on the network. In terms of when we'll be making a decision about that, I think we're going to try to capture the factors that are important to making that decision. I mentioned some of them, driven by what are the opportunities, benefits, desires to be able to connect to, we have BART on one end at Daly City. We have a question mark on what Link 21 will be recommending on the other end. So what are the benefits and trade-offs to that? We'll frame up that question today, or not today, as part of this phase, and make that decision as part of the alternatives analysis that will come after this phase.
Thanks, Sandy. Sticking on this theme for a moment, there's a few questions that have to do with how the project might connect to other parts of the network. So I'll briefly read those. One, how far south might the subway extend? Would it extend to Daly City BART? And the other similar question, just in a different direction, could this project consider allowing for interoperability with regional rail trains? Could connections to the standard gauge at Salesforce Transit Center, as well as possibly connecting to SMART via the Golden Gate Bridge, be explored?
Lots of great examples there of regional connection. So I'll take them in order. Overall, yes, I think it is very important for us to be considering about how these trains themselves, as well as passengers using these trains, might connect at both the endpoints and elsewhere in the system to other rail systems. I think what we'd really like to do is optimize the ability to run the trains themselves beyond the borders of San Francisco. So that, nothing is easy. All of this requires big construction work at either end. So I don't want to upset anyone at BART or a partner agency by making this sound like a simple project, particularly in downtown San Francisco at that end. But we are interested in exploring how a direct connection can be made to BART at Daly City, tying into the regional rail system in downtown San Francisco, whether via Salesforce Transit Center or an adjacent facility that might be constructed as part of Link 21. They've been exploring some of those options. I think smart trains in Marin will be a bit more difficult. As folks are probably familiar, BART had a difficult time 50 years ago getting approval to cross the Golden Gate Bridge. I anticipate it will not be any easier today or cheaper. So certainly something that we can explore and capture, but I don't want to give that one too much currency at this juncture.
Thanks, Andy. I want to know for the group, I see a few folks with their hands up. If you have a question that you're able to put into the Q&A function, that'll help us make sure we address it before we sign out this evening. Andy, we have shifting gears a little bit. We have a question about the relationship of this project to the Geary Bus Rapid Transit, or BRT, program. Specifically, would this project replace the Geary BRT?
No, it would not. So I think as we look at the demands for transportation, particularly in the Geary corridor looking ahead, we think it's going to require a sort of all of the above approach. So we think about, for example, Mission today. We have BART as a subway underneath. We have a local bus and a rapid bus with bus lanes on top, all of them serving different types of trips. So the subway serving long distance or faster trips, the rapid bus serving folks that are maybe reluctant to go downstairs or have a medium distance of trip with a high frequency, and then the local bus on top of that. So I think a corridor like Geary in particular has the travel demand and has the density to need all different types of transit, and the demand profile that we're seeing far into the future requires that. So no, it would not replace Geary BRT or Geary Rapid work, and we would work to understand how to minimize construction disruption of that surface improvements.
Thanks, Andy. Just trying to consolidate.
Oh, sorry, one more thing to add on Geary that as you consolidate, did want to note that those projects are also on very different timescales. And so there is a need for improved capacity and transit on Geary as we see ridership returning relatively quickly to that route, while the subway improvement is still a number of years off, 15 plus years away.
Thanks, Andy. And I'll also just add on that same question that the broad message as we look out to the long term is that buses alone won't be enough to serve the appetite for travel in this corridor, and that it really merits the type of approach that we see in the Market Street corridor or the Mission Street corridor, where we have rail with buses on top serving the overall transit service. I'll shift gears again, and there's a question, maybe I can start on this one, Andy, and then you can add. Question is about funding. What types of capital funding would you anticipate to use for this project? Projects at this scale, and we've seen this with other major rail investments in the region, require participation and partnership from the local jurisdiction, from the region, from the state, and from the federal government. This project will be no exception, and part of our work in this and future stages will be to develop and refine a cost estimate for the project, as well as to develop a funding approach and ultimately a funding strategy that takes into account both our existing toolkit as well as might be required in this particular corridor to fully fund the project over time. We do think that this project will be competitive for grant funding sources at a regional, state, and federal level. This corridor has a strong tie to both the region's long-range plan as well as to the state rail plan, which helps it be prioritized then for federal funding sources through both the Federal Transit Administration and the Federal Railroad Administration. So very much both developing our own local toolkit of funding and positioning the project to be effective in seeking state and federal funds will be part of our work in the coming years as this project consideration for this project moves forward. All right, just one I'm going to take us back to technology for a moment, Andy, because there's a lot of questions about technology interest in this.
Sure, yeah.
Question here, could this study consider high-frequency automated light metro technology comparable to the Copenhagen Metro or Oahu SkyTrain? This type of metro is the standard in some other countries.
I won't say no, but I will say the reason we are focusing on the 3 technologies that we listed at this point is because we want to ensure the maximum amount of interoperability as possible. So I see some other questions in there about, why stop at Daly City? Why stop downtown? Being able to pick one of the technologies that already exists in the Bay Area today means that we're not learning as we go to some respects. It's things we've built before and also things we've operated before. And it also lets us run those trains through beyond just the Geary 19 subway network itself, giving one-seat rides, beyond San Francisco to the broader region.
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to grab one of the questions from the chat and I'll take a first stab. So the question is, how would businesses along the Geary corridor be impacted? This is a question that's very important to us. At the highest level, research has shown that rail has a long-term positive effect on economic development. As we zoom into the Geary and 19th Avenue corridor specifically, a lot will come down to the design of the project, the land use planning decisions that are made, and other supportive policies, both in construction and operation, that ensure we leverage the maximum benefits from the project and manage some of the constraints and challenges. So we have work ahead with all of you in that process, and we can anticipate that there will be work both with respect to things like how are stations well integrated into the community, how does the supportive bus network tie into those stations, how are things like parking policy and land use synced up over time, and how is the construction period managed? I'll also, because it's another question also in the chat, with respect to construction impacts and impacts at the surface. While we haven't advanced any detailed designs for the project, we would expect that for a subway alignment, that this would largely most likely be a tunnel boring machine construction method, which allows for significantly reduced level of impact at the surface between stations, allowing for traffic to be maintained and then the activity constructing the station only at those station locations. While I'm talking about stations, I'll also perhaps address a few of the questions both in the chat and in the Q&A about station locations. As Andy noted, I believe in his presentation, in this stage, we will not yet be selecting station locations. Typically for urban metro subways, station spacing can range from about half a mile to a mile. Think the BART corridor within San Francisco or the Inner East Bay. And decision-making around stations will tie to some other factors like the connective transit network and the approach to integrating the project with the region's network to the south and to the east downtown. So that planning work will occur over the series of future phases guided by some of the major considerations that we identify in this phase.
Jesse, I'll jump in on station spacing as well. I think one of the key trade-offs that I want to make sure I share with people today is in projects elsewhere around the world, not just in the United States, stations are actually one of the biggest cost items. So the number of stations is something that we want to make sure we can maximize for accessibility, but also manage to that reasonable spacing that you mentioned, both to make sure people traveling along the subway don't have a lot of stops as they go along, but also understanding that if we want to think about how we make this the most cost-effective investment possible, that our stations are going to be an important part of that.
Thanks, Andy. I will maybe take the next one, and I'll read this question because there are a few that are of a similar theme. So the question is, the Central Subway extension went well beyond its planned timeline to build, and I believe its budget. Is there anything that can be done in terms of planning now to present this? I really appreciate this question as a transportation professional. And I'll maybe just start by saying these large projects are not easy. They are full of challenge. The approach that we propose to take, as Andy described on that slide, with successive phases of advancing the project, is part of an approach to ensure that we progressively have a better understanding of what it will take to deliver the project, its major risks and costs, and getting to increasing understanding of the cost and schedule to build the project so that decision makers and the public are able to grapple with when, how, and if to advance the project to future phases. We're certainly learning from the successes and failures of past projects, and we're using this phase to lay out a path that incorporates those lessons learned and best practices, including some of the lessons and strategies identified in the SFCTA's Transportation Capital Project Delivery Study that our board endorsed, I believe, last year for that very question. So this will be a continuing topic of conversation, but do wanted to recognize that question and the work that will go in shown here to advancing the project over time. Andy, we have a few questions about sort of service location and service like destinations and service plan. So one question is about the Outer Richmond. Why not go out to the Outer Richmond? You would be missing many blocks of densely populated areas. Another question is about traffic on the west side, and could the subway go down Sunset rather than 19th Avenue, given some of the traffic impacts in the Great Highway and Sunset corridors? So do you just want to touch on some of the considerations for routing, recognizing we're not making the detailed decision right now, but we have selected Geary and 19th?
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. I think this is a really good question as well. A lot of the work to focus on Geary with the connection to 19th Avenue happened as part of Connect SF. And I think a couple points to mention. I think first, again, I would reference the importance of making a connection rather than having a stub end in San Francisco, and making that connection in a place where it can capture the most riders. So we're trying, of course, not to think of this subway in a vacuum. There's a really robust Muni network in San Francisco today. I think one of our considerations is to consider, if the subway is constructed, how better can that Muni network connect to it, to make sure we capture the most amount of people that are able to reach the subway, and maximize the usefulness and ridership of it. I think some of the analyses that happened in Connect SF showed that ridership started to drop off once we got a little bit past Park Presidio, 19th Avenue, in the Richmond. I think we're going to be testing those assumptions again as part of this phase to sort of confirm that project description. And similarly, along 19th Avenue versus Sunset, a couple of perspectives that were surfaced in Connect SF that I can share in Sunset is both similarly, taking the subway further west means that fewer people are likely to backtrack that are living between 19th Avenue and Sunset to make it to the subway. But also because we know that the outer Sunset is a lot of sand dunes, construction is a little bit more challenging the further west we go towards the beach and the Great Highway.
Thanks, Andy. Just on a related theme, could you touch on, there's some questions with respect to the connection to the UCSF Parnassus campus and the N-Judah corridor. So the question specifically was, could the routing decision consider a decision to underground the N-Judah and leverage that as UCSF connection, which would keep the route closer to 19th?
I think we are going to explore, again, how this investment might interact with other investments. We're going to need to balance the need to deliver the sort of core subway with the things that go along with it. I saw another question in there about combining the undergrounding of a lot of the regional traffic on 19th Avenue with the subway as well. Similar to Jesse, as a planning professional, those are all really cool ideas I'm really excited about. They're also ideas that may double the cost of the project and make it even harder or even longer to deliver. So I think we do want to capture those ideas and look for opportunities, as I mentioned, I think on one of my slides, to not just think about this as a single transportation project or single subway project. How else can we fold other opportunities into this? Are there efficiencies for that? But also keep in mind that, recognizing, as Jesse was discussing, these kinds of big projects are hard, expensive, and long as they are, and making sure that our scope for the work stays as tight as possible to deliver the benefits that we see.
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to read a few questions because there's a lot of interest. We've touched on it a little bit, but you and I could just close, or not close, but touch on these themes again. And they have a lot to do with what I would call construction methods for the project. So one question is, why not do cut and cover? Tunneling is expensive and takes more time. Example, Central Subway. Then in the chat, would alternatives include options for reducing or mitigating construction cost risks for stations where possible? For example, cut and cover versus tunnel boring. And you touched briefly on the concept and also submitted around, could this be combined with undergrounding 19th Avenue? So maybe I'll just note broadly that the final decision on the construction method for the project is a long ways off. We have a lot of work to do to define where the community would like the alignment to be, where stations would be located, and for us to look at the broad trade-offs of different construction methodologies and how they would relate to an effective construction period and the design of the project. These are all good questions that will be part of that work, and we'll look forward over time to sharing some of the trade-offs between these different approaches as they relate specifically to the Geary 19th Avenue corridor. So we have a question that I'm hoping actually that Stephen Chun, our Director of Communications, could take, which is, will you be reaching out to the public through neighborhood newspapers, Richmond Review, and Sunset Beacon?
Hi, Stephen Chun here, SFCTA Director of Communications. We are always working with the community, and as Jesse mentioned, with the public as well. And can you clarify the question, as in, are we reaching out to a specific media outlet, or?
The question was, will we be reaching out via community newspapers? And the questioner specifically noted the Richmond Review, Sunset Beacon.
Thank you for your question. So we do have a press release published in the Richmond Review, Sunset Beacon as of yesterday. And I do see that some of the editor and reporters teams have joined for tonight's town hall. We are in close contact with the media, and our goal is to contact the media so that we can share our project updates and allow them to share it with the public. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. We have a question about, could we or why not consider using the site of the Presidio yard to store vehicles for a Geary subway? I'll take that one to start, and Andy can jump in. The SFMTA Muni system really relies on that Presidio yard as a critical site for the bus fleet, and they are planning to modernize that facility in the coming years to serve the future electrified fleet and to support a potential joint development opportunity adjacent to the Presidio yard. So that site is spoken for the local transit system, is really critical to the buses that we rely on, provided by SFMTA. And so it's not a site that we are considering for rail vehicles for the Geary 19th Avenue subway.
Yeah, I'll jump in a little bit on that one as well. Again, really glad this question came up. As we've started to sift through some of the strategic issues that we've come up in our technical work, and I'm glad to hear people attuned to it this evening as well, is that this is going to be one of our most challenging problems. All of the existing systems today don't have extra space, let's put it that way. There may be opportunities to expand some of it, but a lot of the stuff that is close enough to be useful is really hard to expand because it's such a built up area in San Francisco or in San Mateo County or even in the East Bay. So we're going to need to do some really critical thinking about what's an acceptable distance away from a yard for a subway to be, how can it function reliably, and what's the right size for that? And is there a single site or multiple sites? It's all really good questions, and I'm glad to hear people asking about it this evening.
Andy, coming back to technology, we had a question about if a subway could serve multiple technologies simultaneously in what planners might call a dual mode configuration?
Yeah, we have also been discussing this option with the Link 21 team, who's examining a Transbay crossing and had a similar question come up earlier in their planning. The bottom line is it's extremely difficult to do, and at the end of the day, really limits the capacity of the subway. So unfortunately, federal regulations that we cannot control dictate that regional rail vehicles that I was talking about, the big electrified regional rail vehicles, can't share time, space, track with lighter rapid transit vehicles. So the only way to put them together is to make sure that there's really big physical spacing between the two of them. We think that a Geary 19 subway, given those 300,000 potential daily riders, is the kind of facility that will deserve 3 to 5 minute service, train, show up and go, rather than something that could accept gaps of 15 minutes or more in between trains. So we're considering selecting a single technology for this investment.
Thanks, Andy. We have a question about if there is an accompanying housing plan that informs this project. I can take this one. As Andy indicated in his presentation, San Francisco has a recently approved what we call housing element, which is mandated by the state to provide for zoning that would allow the accommodation, in our case, of 80,000 housing units. Many of those are planned in that housing element for locations that would be served by the Geary 19th Avenue corridor subway. And that certainly is part of the long-term planning that is guiding this project. I will also say that the corridor today is a very transit supportive corridor, as we see based on the existing strong community ridership and the extent to which the addition of a regional connection through a rail project would be expected to generate a significant amount of ridership. Andy, is there anything to add on that point?
No, I think you covered it well, Jesse. Thanks.
We have a question about the next phase of work. And the question is, when will the next phase of the project for alternatives analysis be advanced? And will the Transportation Authority use Prop L funds for that phase? I'll take a first cut at this one. The Transportation Authority, through our sales tax program, has provided funding to conduct the study phase that we're engaged in presently, bringing us all here this evening. The alternatives analysis phase, to fully complete it, will be a more significant investment as compared to this phase. We have a portion of that money, what we call programmed by the Transportation Authority Board through an action later this month, which will set aside a portion of the funds potentially that could be directed to the next alternatives analysis phase. We also would like to position the project to seek other grant funds from the region, the state, or federal governments to round out the funding plan for that next phase of work, working with our partners at the SFMTA, the Planning Department, and other regional agencies. So we have a down payment on the next phase of work, but we haven't yet fully funded the alternatives analysis phase. Andy, we have a question about, will this plan include express trains? Could express trains run in this subway?
So I'm going to take that question to mean a New York City, Manhattan style 4-track right-of-way with express and local trains rather than a service pattern that might skip some stations. I would say that our anticipated alignment has 2 tracks only, one in each direction. That's not a decision that has been made yet, but as we think about the service pattern and the potential benefits of express versus local trains, we have done some work about what a end-to-end for the subway itself travel time might be between Daly City and downtown San Francisco. For reference on BART today, that's a little under 20 minutes. By this routing, it would be a little over 20 minutes. So what is actually a very fast trip. So We think the trade-offs there are, again, serving more stations, stopping, being able to serve different kinds of trips and people getting on and off, and maintaining a high speed sort of end to end so people that are taking longer trips can get there faster. Using, BART, Unimetro, or regional rail technology, we can achieve pretty high travel times with a local service stopping pattern.
Great, thanks, Andy. I want to acknowledge to everyone that we're a bit past our close time of 7. I will do a scan through the questions to see if there's anything that thematically we didn't get a chance to touch on. I apologize if we didn't get to your specific question in every detail. We will have another town hall on this Saturday, and you can go to the project website if you'd like to join us at that event. As Andy indicated, you are all also welcome to contact the project team at the project email, geary19th@sfcta.org. And we'll also look forward to future opportunities to meet with all of you, either in a setting like this, or we are available to come present to your community-based organization at one of your regular meetings for a more in-depth and focused conversation on the project and the interests that your particular group may have with respect to the community. So I'll just pick up two last questions that relate to sort of a wrap-up theme. One is I'll read a few. How can we as citizens continue to support the project? Does the public have a say on technology that will be chosen for the project? And what resources or information will you provide to help educate ourselves and be asking the right questions? So those are all fantastic questions that we appreciate. Please go to the project website and make sure that you're signed up to get updates for this project. You'll also be able to see the presentation materials in English as well as Spanish and Chinese. And we'll be posting additional information there as this phase advances. This phase will yield a final report that would be presented publicly and would go to our board, which will serve as sort of the warehouse of the analysis and recommendations of this phase that will reflect the input we received tonight and through our other public engagements within this phase. So with that, I think that is a wrap on the questions. Andy, is there anything else you wanted to add on these excellent questions we received from everyone in attendance this evening?
It's just doing a quick scan myself as well. I'm so happy to see so many people so excited about this project. I'm looking forward to sticking with it and sticking with all of you as we move into some of the decisions that we're also curious about how this project will interact with the city, how routes will be chosen, how stations will be selected. I do want to emphasize that we want this to be as a balance of a community-led process to make sure that our benefits are maximized and that folks like Jesse, myself, and our colleagues can bring planning and engineering expertise to help answer some of the questions about most effective delivery, tackling the big amount of time and money it takes to do things here. So I'm really happy to hear everyone's questions today and the things that you all are thinking about. We want to be thinking about them too, and would appreciate your continued attendance and support, as Jesse mentioned.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your time in the middle of the week. We really appreciate it. Take care and stay tuned.